Today we're going to talk about the theme of diminishing fear for your Martin Luther King essay. And we're going to focus on the Montgomery bus boycott and Rosa Parks' role in that boycott. Okay? I'll pause periodically to have you fill out the questions on the right side of your page. Make sure you're following along with me. And here we go. The Montgomery bus boycott. The Montgomery bus boycott, in which African Americans refused to ride city buses in Montgomery, Alabama, to protest segregated seating, took place from December 5th, 1955 to December 20th, 1956, and it was regarded as the first large-scale demonstration against segregation in the U.S. On December 1st, 1955, 4 days before the boycott began, Rosa Parks, an African-American woman, refused to yield her seat to a white man on a Montgomery bus. She was arrested and fined. The boycott of public buses by blacks in Montgomery began on the day of Parks' court hearing and lasted 381 days. The U.S. Supreme Court ultimately ordered Montgomery to integrate its bus system, and one of the leaders of the boycott, a young pastor named Martin Luther King Jr., emerged as a prominent national leader of the American civil rights movement in the wake of the action. So, real quick, on the right side of the page, you are going to write who was involved in this situation, what happened, where did it happen, and why did it happen. But before we get to that, I want to just review, what does segregation mean? Think about it. Segregation means separating. So at this time period, you had African Americans and whites. They had separate bathrooms, separate water fountains. When they went into restaurants, they had different places they entered. When they were on buses, they had separate spots they had to sit. They had separate schools. So the main thing that they were starting with fighting against here was the buses. The buses had a section in the back for anyone who was black, and a section in the front for anyone who was white. The other word that I want to talk about is boycott. A boycott is where you don't support a business. And most of the time that means you just don't go into that business. So if I was going to boycott McDonald's, I would not shop at McDonald's at all. I'd go to Wendy's, I'd go to Hardee's, I'd go to Sonic, but I would never walk into McDonald's. And a lot of times they would have protests outside of McDonald's where they hold up signs saying, I don't want to go to McDonald's. Well, in this case, they boycotted the buses. So they refused to go on these buses, and a lot of them would walk long distances just to prove the point that they didn't want to support segregated buses. Now, think about what that would do to a business. If all of a sudden a huge portion of the people who go to your business stop coming, think of the impact that would have. Go ahead and pause here and make sure you filled out the who, the what, the where, and the why. Montgomery bus boycott. Parks refuses to yield bus seat. In 1955, African Americans were still required by a Montgomery, Alabama city ordinance to sit in the back half of city buses and to yield their seats to white riders if the front half of the bus reserved for whites was full. On December 1st, 1955, African American seamstress Rosa Parks was returning home from her job at a local department store on the Cleveland Avenue bus. She was seated in the front row of the colored section. When the white seats filled, the driver, J. Fred Blake, asked Parks and 3 others to vacate their seats. The other African American riders complied, but Parks refused. She was arrested and fined $10 plus $4 in court fees. This was not Parks' first encounter with Blake. In 1943, she had paid her fare at the front of a bus he was driving, then exited so she could re-enter through the back door, as required. Blake pulled away before she could reboard the bus. So in this section, think about her encounters with this bus driver. What fears may have entered into her mind when she refused to get up. Think about the situation a few years prior to this, where if you were African American, you get on a bus, you would pay your money, and then you'd have to get off the bus and go around to the back door and climb in the back door. Well, in this instance, she got off the bus to go around to the back, and the driver just drove off, took her money, drove off, and left her there. And she was stuck trying to find a way home. So think about what fears may have entered her mind. Also, keep in mind that she could get in serious trouble for this. Okay, pause the video here and answer that question. Why wasn't there a protest after this happened to Claudette Colvin? I want you to, while I'm reading through this short little section, did you know section, think about, why do you think they didn't want to have Claudette Colvin be the symbol for their cause? Did you know, 9 months before Rosa Parks' arrest for refusing to give up her bus seat, 15-year-old Claudette Colvin was arrested in Montgomery for the same act. The city's black leaders prepared to protest until it was discovered Colvin was pregnant and deemed an inappropriate symbol for their cause. So think about this. Claudette Colvin refuses to get on the bus, or off the bus, give up her seat, and she gets arrested. And they say, you know what, she's going to be the perfect person. Let's focus our boycott around her. Then they find out that she is pregnant. Why would that change their views on using her as their symbol for this cause? Also consider the age difference between Rosa Parks and Claudette Colvin. Rosa Parks was in her 30s, Rosa Parks was in her 40s. Claudette Colvin was 15 years old. So think about that, pause the video, and answer this question. Although Parks has sometimes been depicted as a woman with no history of civil rights activism at the time of her arrest, she and her husband Raymond were in fact active in the local chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, and Parks served as its secretary. Upon her arrest, Parks called Ed Nixon, a prominent black leader who bailed her out of jail and determined she would be an upstanding and sympathetic plaintiff in a legal challenge of the segregation ordinance. African American leaders decided to attack the ordinance using other tactics as well. The Women's Political Council, a group of black women working for civil rights, began circulating flyers calling for a boycott of the bus system on December 5th, the day Parks would be tried in municipal court. So at this point, I want you to answer, what is the NAACP, which is still around, and how did the boycott start? Pause the video and answer those two questions. As news of the boycott spread, African American leaders across Montgomery, Alabama's capital city, began lending their support. Black ministers announced the boycott in church on Sunday, December 4th, and the Montgomery Advertiser, a general interest newspaper, published a front-page article on the planned action. Approximately 40,000 African American bus riders, the majority of the city's black bus riders, boycotted the system the next day. On the afternoon of December 5th, black leaders met to form the Montgomery Improvement Association. The group elected Martin Luther King Jr., the 26-year-old pastor of Montgomery's Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, as its president, and decided to continue the boycott until the city met its demands. Initially, the demands did not include changing the segregation laws. Rather, the group demanded courtesy, the hiring of black drivers, which they didn't have at the time, and a first-come, first-seated policy, with whites entering and filling seats from the front and African Americans from the rear. Ultimately, however, a group of 5 Montgomery women, represented by attorney Fred D. Gray and the NAACP, sued the city in U.S. District Court, seeking to have the busing segregation laws invalidated. Although African Americans represented at least 75% of Montgomery's bus ridership, the city resisted complying with the MIA's demands. To ensure the boycott could be sustained, black leaders organized carpools, and the city's African American taxi drivers charged only 10 cents, the same price as bus fare for African American riders. Many black residents chose simply to walk to work and other destinations. Black leaders organized regular mass meetings to keep African American residents mobilized around the boycott. So I want to answer the following questions. How did Martin Luther King get involved? What does the MIA stand for? What demands did the MIA start with? And what steps were taken to make sure the boycott could last for a long time? Integration at last. On June 5th, 1956, a Montgomery federal court ruled that any law requiring racially segregated seating on buses violated the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. That amendment, adopted in 1868 following the American Civil War, guarantees all citizens, regardless of race, equal rights and equal protection under state and federal laws. The city appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, which upheld the lower court's decision on December 20th, 1956. Montgomery's buses were integrated on December 21st, 1956, and the boycott ended. It had lasted 381 days. Now, integration or integrated is the opposite of segregated. Okay? Integrated means that they were all brought together, everybody was able to sit together. Integration met with significant resistance and even violence. While the buses themselves were integrated, Montgomery maintained segregated bus stops. Snipers began firing into buses, and one shattered both legs of a pregnant African American passenger. In January 1957, 4 black churches and the homes of prominent black leaders were bombed. A bomb at King's house was defused. On January 30th, 1957, the Montgomery police arrested 7 bombers. All were members of the Ku Klux Klan, a white supremacist group. The arrests largely brought an end to the busing-related violence. So the questions I want you to think about is, how did the boycott reach an end? So think about what the court said. And then after integration, how was fear attempting to be used as a motivator? So what did they try to do to scare people? Okay. What did they do to try to scare people? Look at the last section of that section. Boycott puts King in spotlight. The Montgomery bus boycott was significant on several fronts. First, it is widely regarded as the earliest mass protest on behalf of civil rights in the U.S., setting the stage for additional large-scale actions outside the court system to bring about fair treatment for African Americans. Second, in his leadership of the MIA, Martin Luther King emerged as a prominent national leader of the civil rights movement, while also solidifying his commitment to nonviolent resistance. King's approach remained a hallmark of the civil rights movement throughout the 1960s. Shortly after the boycott's end, he helped found the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, a highly influential civil rights organization that worked to end segregation throughout the South. The SCLC was influential in the civil rights campaign in Birmingham, Alabama in the spring of 1963, and the March on Washington in August of that same year, during which King delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech. The boycott also brought national and international attention to the civil rights struggles occurring in the U.S. as more than 100 reporters visited Montgomery during the boycott to profile the effort and its leaders. Rosa Parks, while shying from the spotlight throughout her life, remained an esteemed figure in the history of the American civil rights activism. In 1999, the U.S. Congress awarded her its highest honor, the Congressional Medal of Honor. Okay, so right now I want you to think about, how does your biggest fear compare to the fear of African American leaders during the civil rights movement? So think about your fears and how do they compare to the fears, especially think about the previous section. How do those compare? All right, this has been the article, and we are signing out. Homeroom, anything to say?
Bye.
Everybody say bye.
Make sure you
Bye.